club was the best team in South America last split, and it wasn't really all that close. Not only did the club go on to win every event in the region during the fall, but they were also pretty dominant in doing so. In fact, in the second regional, they managed to win the entire tournament without losing a single game. Not a series, but a single game. They swept everybody, which is something that nobody else has been able to do. James Cheese hasn't done it in Asia, yet, and Sandrock Gaming / Team Falcons wasn't able to do it in any tournament last season. And those are two of the most dominant teams in the single region that we've ever seen. And in that same regional where the club swept everybody, no one was even able to take them to an overtime in the playoffs. And in the grand finals against Team Secret, the club outscored them 11-1. So while they did take a couple series losses in other tournaments during the split, when this team was at their best, and sometimes even when they weren't, I don't think it's possible to over-exaggerate just how dominant this team was in their region. And their being first in the region in points, even after what happened at the major, is a testament to that. But if you didn't watch or pay attention to the South American regionals, which, let's be honest, probably includes a lot of you watching right now, and if your only time seeing a South American team this season was at the most recent major, then you could have easily walked away from that major with the conclusion that Team Secret was the best team in their region. And given how the two South American teams played at that major, that would have been a very fair conclusion to come to. The club went 1-3 in the Swiss stage, with their only series win coming against the struggling Pioneers, while Team Secret went 3-1 in the Swiss stage and even managed to make it all the way to the semifinals. These results go directly against what most people expected to happen for these teams, so let's try to figure out why that was the case. And after we do that, we'll take a brief look at what the future may have in store for these teams, since huge changes are probably coming for at least one of them. And yeah, let's get into it. So looking at the club, I know that I just talked about how dominant this team was in their region, and while that is true, I still have a little bit of frustration when I think about them, because even with how good they were, I think they could have been even better. At the risk of sounding disrespectful, the club was kind of a two-man show on the fall split. Lost was an absolute monster when it came to shooting the ball. He led the region in goals per game by a lot, and he was also second in shooting percentage on a much higher volume of shots than the leader in that stat. Also, speaking of shots, he led the region in that stat by a lot too. Which makes sense, because if you're going to be that good of a shooter, you might as well do it as often as you can. A lot of people would agree that he's been the best player in the region so far this season, and that's also why he's the focus of one of the biggest potential roster moves before the start of the winter split, but we'll get to that later. And on the other side of the two-man show, Astramic was Lost's running mate on the offensive side of the ball, and often looked just as capable as his teammate whenever he was in possession. He was second in the region in goals per game, and he was third in the region in assists per game. And while it may be easier to rack up the assists when your team is able to score so many goals and you have a shooter like Lost on your team, Astramic still deserves a lot of credit for the great passing ability that he showed off. And one other thing that Lost and Astramic had over the competition is that they played way faster than all their opponents, as they're the two fastest players in the region by a wide margin. The main benefit of that for them was that if they decided to go for the ball, they would usually be able to get there before anyone else. And because of that, the game was often played on their terms. So with Astramic and Lost speeding around the field and doing most of the work on the ball for this team, Bems would most often be the guy who was in a more defensive position to support his teammates, being farther back on the field and farther away from the ball more often than most other players in the region. And by itself, this is pretty expected. If you have two teammates who are really good on offense and spend a lot of time up there, then it makes sense for the third person on the team to sit back and support and let his teammates cook. So in that regard, I thought he did just fine. But I think that the biggest issue was that he was a clear step below his teammates when it came to actually making a play on the ball. And while being second to Lost and Astramic isn't something to be ashamed of, there are plenty of times when I thought Bems had a great chance to make a play, and he would just miss the opportunity, especially when it came to shooting. He was in the bottom 20 in the region in goals per game, while admittedly getting those goals on a similarly low number of shots, and he was also in the bottom 20 in the region in shooting percentage. And while he did have a pretty good number of assists, a lot of those came from his teammates making great plays after they followed up on a 50 that Bems got, rather than just Bems making a great play on the ball himself. Now I hope that I'm not sounding too harsh, because I do think that Bems is a good player, and he was able to make some great plays. But the reason why I'm focusing on this point like this is that this is why I said that I thought this team could have been even better. Because if you're going to have a player to sit behind two offensive and mechanical teammates, it's a huge weapon for the team if the player back there is also a huge threat when he has the ball. And I think that's something this team had last season when KV1 was on the roster. Or, as they say in Brazil, KV1, which sounds way cooler. KV1 was really a perfect fit on this team last season because he was very happy to sit away from the ball on the defensive side while Astramic and Lost did their thing on offense, which we saw a lot of in last year's World Championship. In regards to his positioning and ball distance, he was even more conservative than what we've seen from Bems this season. But in the chances that he got on the ball, he was much more threatening and more efficient with his scoring, especially in land setting. And this team composition was a huge reason why the club was so threatening against Furia in the region, and why they almost made a run to the top 8 in the World Championship. But after just one split together, and one LAN appearance at the World Championship, the team decided to split with KV1 after last season, which sent him over to Team Secret. And while I may not have liked the decision, KV1 probably isn't too upset with it right now, because he and Team Secret are doing pretty alright. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about how Team Secret did in regionals, because honestly there isn't too much to talk about. They qualified for the major, so of course they did pretty good. And yeah, they qualified after a tiebreaker match with Crew, but I think the point still stands. And while they were competitive with them sometimes, they didn't come close to the level of dominance that the club showed. If there's one thing in particular to shout out, it's that SAD made a very good case for being the best playmaker in the region by leading South America in assists during the fall split. But alright, that's enough about that, because the main thing I want to talk about with this team is how they performed in the major. Because not only did they do way better than anybody expected them to, but they did it in a way that I doubt many people saw coming. Usually, when we see a smaller region team playing so well, it's because of offensive fireworks and mechanics. And I think the reason this happens is that because of the lower level of competition across the board in smaller regions, the better teams don't really need to respect their opponents all that much, and they can just outspeed them to the ball whenever they decide to go for it, which leads to them doing whatever they want basically. What we saw from the club last split out of Lost Nostromica is a good example of that, and so is basically any OCE LAN team ever. But recently we have been seeing more exceptions to that. Furia's playstyle last season was a lot more controlled than what we'd see out of South American teams, and Ocalid himself is more defensive than pretty much anybody we've ever seen come out of a smaller region. But generally, in the past, whenever we see a smaller region team come to a LAN, they try to come out and win with their speed and aggression. And they typically end up falling short when North American and European teams are able to match their speed, and they have no other cards to play after that. But Team Secret went totally against this trend, because when they made it to the top 4 in the fall major, they did it because of great team defense, having one of the best defenses out of all the teams of the event. They allowed the second fewest goals per game and the second lowest shooting percentage from opponents, being beat out by only version 1 in both of those stats. And a lot of the time, when we see teams do well on defense, it's because they spend so much time on offense that their opponents can't get many scoring chances. But that wasn't the case for this team, because they spent a lot of time playing defense. They allowed the second most shots behind only FaZe Clan, and all 3 players on Team Secret were in the top 5 for most time spent in the defensive third. So they played a lot of defense, but they were comfortable with it, because they were really good at it. They stuck to this style regardless of who they were going against. It didn't matter if they were playing the most aggressive teams or another defensive team. They were always patient and always played great defense, and that was enough to get them to the semifinals, being only the 2nd ever South American team and the 4th ever smaller region team to make it that far in the RLCS LAN. We saw them flex their defense in their first series against Moist, who were one of the most aggressive teams in the tournament at times, like I mentioned in my last video. Despite going against this aggressive team, Secret managed to shut them out in 3 of the 4 games they played in that series, and they managed to win that series in 4 games despite never scoring more than 2 goals in a single game themselves. So this was basically a defensive masterclass. And the best example came in game 4 of that series. Team Secret won that game 2-0, despite Moist outshooting them 12-3 in that game, and Secret spending 72.3% of their time in the defensive third as a team. The little box up in the corner said that Knight spent about 57% of his time back there for the entire event, and that was the most out of all players. So I need you all to understand that the team spending 72% of their time back there, even for just a single game, is insane. But they won the game, so I guess it worked. After SAD clears the ball, instead of following up on it with no boost, he turns infield to try to get a bump on somebody before rotating back to the net. Rise gets the ball uncontested on the wall and he takes it up in the air, while Knight quickly grabs the side boost before rushing back to the net. Then Rise brings the ball into the middle of the field through the air, and KV1 isn't close enough to the ball to get a real challenge in, so instead of just diving, he gets in front of the play and then jumps. And at first glance this might look like a really weird play, but it does 2 things for him. 1, it helps him avoid Rise's bump, but 2, and more importantly, it also cuts off a lot of shooting angles on the net that Astro has, and it makes the shot a lot more difficult than it would have been had KV1 just stayed on the ground. He takes the shot, which ends up being wide, and it's knocked away by Knight, and the ball goes right to KV1 in the middle of the field. And he slowly plays it to the corner and jumps to the back wall so he can quickly get in position for the next 50. Joyo dives in and the ball is sent to the middle of the field, but Knight is still waiting in goal, and he's able to charge out at the ball when the shot is taken, and he makes the save before it gets too threatening. Then the ball goes out to SAD in the corner, and he's able to make the clear. Then later in that same game, this sequence actually starts off with a rare defensive mistake from Secret, with SAD trying to dribble the ball out, and Knight bumping him off of it right as Astro cuts in for the challenge. This leaves KV1 all alone on defense for a bit, with Rise possessing the ball near the corner. Rise takes the shot, missing a potential passing chance to Joyo in the process, and KV1 makes the save, popping it high and off to the left. Even with the low amount of boost that KV1 has here, a lot of players would still try to follow up on this touch themselves to try to make the offense uncomfortable. But what KV1 does instead is he drives underneath the ball and he checks Astral's position to make sure that he's actually going for the ball. And once he's sure that Astral is going for it, he turns around and goes to the back wall to play more defense. And with how long the ball was floating up in the air after KV1's save, this gave Knight enough time to set up in the goal, and gave Sad enough time to loop around to the other corner to grab 100 boost and set up in a defensive position himself. So by the time Astral makes his first touch, KV1 is on the right side of the goal, Sad is on the left side of the goal, and Knight is in the goal, leaving basically no holes in their defense. Astral plays the ball towards the net and is stopped by KV1. Then the ball goes out to Rise, who takes another immediate shot, with all three secret players in the line in front of their goal. This shot is saved by Sad, and Rise does a great job of reading the save to block the clear and keep the ball in the threatening position above Team Secret's net. Also, notice how KV1 immediately turned and ran back to the corner boost right when the shot was taken. With both teammates behind him and near the net, this is as good of a chance as he'll get to go grab boost. And it's a good thing that he did, because after Rise kept the ball in the area, Joe was able to fly up for the follow-up shot, which is again blocked by KV1. And this time he's able to get some power on it since he has full boost, and he clears it out of their half. And for the cherry on top, he's able to chase after the clear and challenge Astral's touch. And since Astral went for an aggressive challenge from the third man position, after KV1 wins the challenge, the ball bounces off the wall and directly into a wide open net. So Team Secret handled aggressive teams pretty well. But an issue that a lot of defensive teams can run into is how they respond when they're going against another defensive team. It's easy to stay on defense when you're getting attacked all the time, but it's harder to be patient when the other team is also staying back on defense. When two teams are being defensive, it's pretty common for one of the teams to get anxious and try to move upfield a little bit to try to force the issue a bit more and make the other team uncomfortable. But that's also the easiest way to overcommit and compromise your own defense in the process. But when Team Secret faced off against another defensive team at the Major in version 1, they didn't have that issue at all. They stayed patient and maintained their defense. And even though they spent a little less time in the defensive third than they did in the other series, which is probably a product of the ball spending less time in their side of the field, they still did a great job of staying true and not overcommitting to try and make a play. And this allowed them to shut down version 1's offense too. In the 5 games that they played in this series, Team Secret shut V1 out in 4 of them. And they again won this series without ever needing to score more than 2 goals in a single game. In game 1 of that series, this play starts with the ball rolling towards the version 1 half and Knight chasing after it. But instead of diving in for the challenge, he instead drives towards the wall, anticipating Torment's next touch and getting a position to block it if it comes that way. But when Torment instead plays it into the middle of the field, Knight rotates through looking for a bump and goes back to the net. Torment goes up for an air dribble, but Sad cuts it out and starts his own aerial play. He gets the flip reset to go past Calm, and while KV1's kind of in the play, once Beast Mode clears it, he turns around and gets out of there. Then Knight meets the ball in the air and plays it into the middle of the field for some reason. I don't think it was a mistouch since we don't see him try to adjust at all when he's making contact with the ball, but passing into the middle of the field like this is weird for a team who rotates back to the net so often, because it's very unlikely that any of his teammates will be there to receive it. Sure enough, neither Sad nor KV1 can reach the ball, so it goes straight to Torment, who goes up for another air dribble. Then we see another one of those pre-jumped soft challenges from KV1, where he's up in the air to challenge the play, but he's not going directly for the ball. He's instead jumping in front of the ball again, looking to cut off as many shooting angles as he can. And again, it works perfectly. Even if Torment hadn't missed the ball, KV1 had already made the shot a lot more difficult than it would have been otherwise. But Torment does miss, and Calm comes in to follow up. But Sad's already waiting nearby to stop him. And when Sad makes this challenge, Knight has already basically finished his rotation back to goal. So with someone always being in support for Team Secret, there was never going to be an opening anyways. Sad's challenge in their half eventually turns into a shooting chance for Team Secret. And while I'm sure KV1 wishes he did better on the shot, Secret had already done their job on defense. And it was because of plays like this that they managed to shut out V1 4 times in 5 games. So yeah, Team Secret did really well at the Major. And they had the type of performance that most people thought the club would have been capable of. But with their 1-3 finish in the Swiss stage, that of course didn't happen for them. And I think the biggest reason for that goes back to what I mentioned earlier. In their region, when they were on offense, the club could really just enforce their will on their opponents and overrun them with pressure until they broke down and got a goal out of it. And even if they didn't get sustained pressure, a lot of the times they were so mechanical that one shot would be enough to get the job done. But when they're playing against better competition in the Major, they couldn't do that. And as a result, they had much less offensive pressure than they were used to having. In the South American regionals, the club averaged 9.51 shots per game, but in the Major, they only had 6.44 shots per game. And on top of the lower volume of shots, they were less efficient on the shots that they did manage to take, which hurt their offense even more. They also had fewer demos, less time spent in the offensive third, and had the ball in their own half for more time in the major than they did in the regionals. Without that ability to maintain offensive pressure, they didn't have anything else to lean back on, and they struggled pretty badly because of it. In Game 3 against Space Station, we saw a couple of plays where the club tried to get aggressive, but it was easily dealt with each time. Daniel gets the ball behind Astramic, and it goes into the club's corner. Then Lost clears the ball downfield, with Astramic in a position to receive it after the boost steal. But during his rotation back, LJ sees what they're trying to do, and he cuts his rotation to turn in field and block the play. Now, after one more touch from Lost and a clear from Daniel, we're in a similar spot, but this time Bems is getting ready to clear the ball downfield and Lost is setting up to receive it. He's able to get the ball over LJ, who was waiting nearby, and Arsenal just goes for a fake challenge before turning back to goal. And honestly, calling this a fake challenge might even be a little generous, because he never got so close to the play to make the fake that convincing. But whether it was because he was worried about a potential challenge, or if it was because it was just a simple mishit, Lost is only able to take a weak shot towards the goal, and it's easily dealt with by Daniel, who cleanly catches the ball to possess it and starts working his way downfield. He scoots behind Astramic in midfield, and after a really smart delayed 50 near the club's net, the ball ends up bouncing in front of their goal off their crossbar, and LJ is easily able to put it away after a nice little soft shot off his wheels. In the regionals, we saw plenty of times where aggressive cherry pick plays just like this worked out perfectly for the club, but in this case against SSG, these plays never even had a chance. Also, this is basically unrelated, but I just wanted to look at this kickoff that Space Station had against the club. Watch this. Yeah, like it doesn't get more aggressive than that. LJ and Arsenal commit for the ball, and Daniel cheats really close to it. And they did this on the first kickoff in the first game of that series. Plus Arsenal manages to get a demo on the kickoff too, because of course he does. And then they get the goal. This isn't the only time that they send multiple people at the kickoff like this, and I'm not really sure how often they do this, but this is definitely something I'm keeping an eye on moving forward. So the race for South America is already interesting enough, but it's about to get turned on its head. Because while the club have had the region in a chokehold during the fall split, with Lost potentially moving to North America to join Furia, they now have to deal with the impossible task of trying to replace him. And with the recent report that Bems might go back to Crew Esports after playing with them last season, it's very possible that this team doesn't even exist in a couple weeks. And unfortunately, roster moves like this is something that Astramic is way too familiar with. Let's quickly look through his roster history. RLCS was dominated by two future North American teams in True Neutral and Furia, but by the end of the season, Rebel, led by Yan and Astramic, had become a team that was able to go toe-to-toe with both of them. Then, Furia takes Yan away, and at the start of the 2021 season, they bring in Math to replace him. And the team does well enough to make it to the major while playing for Air Eternity. And right after that, Secret comes in and takes Math away. So they replace him with KV1 before the winter. Then they miss out on that split's major and make another change, bringing in Lost to replace Snips before the spring split. And while they again miss out on the major, they're still able to make it to the World Championship, thanks to their old teammate Yan and Furia getting an extra spot for the region, and they have a pretty good showing when they get there. After which, they split with KV1 and bring in Bems before the season. Now after a really good split, Lost is likely to leave to Furia, and the cycle starts all over again. I hope that Astramic gets some roster stability one of these days, because he is without a doubt one of the best players in the entire region. But as it stands now, his future is very uncertain, and the fight for the #1 spot in the region just got blown wide open. The club may or may not even be a factor anymore, which means that Team Secret will be able to swoop in and take first place for themselves. Then you have Crew Esports lurking nearby, and then you have dark horses like Endgame trying to stake their claim too. The region may look like it's Team Secret's to lose right now, but it's a long season and we have no idea what's going to happen. But I'm really excited to watch it play out. Join my Discord, follow me on Twitter, like, comment, subscribe, watch the South American regionals, and most importantly, thanks for watching.